On the morning of June 4th, 2015, a 19-year-old Marine from Athens, Tennessee, took a step that was supposed to be his last. It was not his last because of a dog. The dog's name was Ghost. 4 years later, a man in an office in Texas was going to sign a piece of paper that said the dog was past useful life and recommended, quote, disposition by chemical means, end quote. This is the story of what the dog's handler did about that piece of paper. Sanjan District, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. June 4th, 2015, 09:43 local time. Sanjan District, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. June 4th, 2015, 09:43 local time. A foot patrol from 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, is moving north along a goat track between two mud-walled compounds. 11 Marines, single file, 3 meters between each man. The lead element is on a metal detector. The metal detector has been making noise for 40 minutes because the entire valley is full of buried Soviet shell fragment from 1986, and the operator has learned to filter most of it out. He has not learned to filter all of it out. No one has. That is the problem with the job. Behind the metal detector, on a 6-foot lead, is a Belgian Malinois named Ghost. 48 kilograms. 5 years old. Tan coat with a black mask. Scarred along the right shoulder from a bite. He took off another working dog at Lackland in 2012. He is wearing a tactical vest with 1 carabiner clip and a GPS tag and nothing else. He is not panting. The temperature is 41 degrees Celsius. He is not panting because Ghost has learned that panting moves his nose, and a nose that moves cannot smell. Behind Ghost, on the other end of the lead, is Petty Officer 2nd Class Maya Thornton, United States Navy. Master at Arms, K9 handler attached to 2-7 for the duration of this rotation. She is 29 years old. She is 5'6". She is carrying 68 pounds of gear and a Beretta M9 and an MP5 short barrel slung across her chest, and she has not slept more than 4 hours in any of the last 6 nights. And her left has a sty coming in that she has not told the corpsman about because she does not want to be pulled from this patrol. The lead Marine, Lance Corporal Caleb Bowers, 19 years old, from Athens, Tennessee, takes a step. Go sit down. I'm going to stop here for 10 seconds because you need to know who is telling you this. My name is Hatch, 30 years in the Marine Corps, retired gunnery sergeant, 2007. I'm not in this story. I read the paperwork. Now back to the dirt. He does not whine. He does not bark. He does not whine. He does not bark. He does not look at Maya. He sits, and he points his nose at a patch of dirt approximately 3 feet to the left of Bowers's right boot, and he holds it there. Maya raises her left fist. 11 Marines stop moving. The wind that had been coming down the valley from the north stops too. It does not actually stop. It just feels that way when you are about to find out whether someone you walk behind for 140 days has just saved your life or your boots are about to go through the ceiling of a compound 100 meters away. Freeze. Maya's voice. Flat. No volume. The kind of voice you use in a kitchen at 3 in the morning when the baby is finally asleep. Bowers. Don't move your right foot. Shift your weight to your left heel. Slow. Bowers shifts his weight to his left heel. Slow. Sergeant David Quinn, the patrol leader, is 6 meters back. He is 26 years old. He has a wife in 29 Palms and a daughter who is 14 months old and whose name he has tattooed on the inside of his right forearm in script so small that he has to roll his sleeve up to read it. He keys his radio. Sabre 6, this is Sabre 2-1. We have a positive K9 indication. Lead element. Request EOD, over. The radio answers. Djibouti is 47 minutes out by helicopter. There is no road. Maya is already moving. She drops the lead. Ghost holds position. She walks past Bowers, past him, not in front of him, because in front of him is where Ghost is pointing, and she goes down on one knee on the dirt, and she takes a folding probe out of the cargo pocket of her left thigh, and she begins to feel the ground. I want you to understand what she is doing. She is searching for the pressure plate of an improvised explosive device with a piece of fiberglass the size of a pen. She is doing it because there is nothing else to do. The patrol cannot back out the way it came in because the way it came in was not cleared coming the other direction. The patrol cannot wait 47 minutes for Djibouti because in 47 minutes the Taliban observation post on the high ground to the east, which Ghost has not seen but Maya has twice in the last hour through her binoculars, two men with a radio and what looks like a Dragunov will have radioed coordinates, and a mortar team 3 kilometers north will have ranged in, and the Marines who are currently frozen on this goat track in single file will be a fish in a barrel problem for somebody with a tube and a base plate in 20 minutes of time. Maya knows all of this. She knows it the way you know which step on your own staircase creaks. She is not thinking about it. She is feeling the ground. The probe touches something. It is not metal. It is plastic. It is the corner of a yellow plastic jug, the kind that holds 2.5 gallons of cooking oil in any market in Helmand province, that has been buried 6 inches under the dust with 35 pounds of homemade explosive packed inside it, and a pressure plate of carbon rods and a strip of saw blade across the top. The pressure plate sits exactly under where Bowers's right boot was about to come down. Maya marks it with an orange chem light and backs off, one knee at a time, and she picks up Ghost's lead and she walks the patrol 3 meters off the goat track into the wadi to the west, and she walks them along the wadi for 240 meters until Ghost sits down again, this time at a culvert, and they go off the wadi too, and that is how it goes for the next 4 hours and 12 minutes, until they reach the strong point, and the 11 Marines walk through the gate, all of them, on their own feet. Bowers does not say anything to Maya at the gate. He does not know what to say. He is 19. His mother is a kindergarten teacher in Athens, Tennessee, and his father drives a UPS truck, and he has never in his life been in a position where another human being walked between him and his own death and then handed him back his life like it was a set of keys he had dropped. He goes around behind the Strong Point's Hesco wall, and he sits down in the dust, and he cries for about 90 seconds. Nobody sees him do it. Then he stops, and he wipes his face on the inside of his collar, and he goes to find Ghost, and he gets down on his knees, and he puts his arms around a dog's neck, and he stays there for a long time. And somebody named Corporal Esteban Mata, who has a camera because Mata always has a camera. He is the kind of Marine who is going to come home and become a photographer, and he does. He lives in Tucson now and takes pictures of high school football games for a paper. Mata takes one picture. He does not ask permission. He just takes it. The shutter clicks. That picture exists. For years later, it is going to be slid across a captain's desk at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, and it is going to end a man's career. But we are not there yet. I'm going to tell you how we got there. My name is Hatch. I spent 30 years in the United States Marine Corps. I retired as a gunnery sergeant in 2007, and I have spent the years since then reading the paperwork that comes out of the wars I missed and the wars I didn't. I never met Maya Thornton. I never met Ghost. I have read the citation that was written for her and the citation that was not. I have read the disposition letter that was signed by a man named Harold Pierce on the 17th of September, 2019. I have read the Inspector General report that was filed 8 months after that letter was signed, and I have read the page 47 paragraph that nobody at the Department of Defense wanted to talk about for 3 years. I'm going to tell you what was in those documents. I'm going to tell you what was not in them. And I'm going to tell you what a 33-year-old petty officer first class did on the morning of October 9th, 2019, in an office on the second floor of Building 682 at Joint Base in Antonio, Lackland, when a civilian director with a 30-year-old policy memo and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Boss" told her that the dog who had sat down in the dirt in San Jin and saved Caleb Bowers' life was, quote, past useful life, end quote, and that the recommendation of the veterinary branch was, quote, disposition by chemical means, end quote. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She said, "Yes, sir. Understood, sir." And she walked out of his office, and she got in her Subaru Outback in the parking lot, and she drove 460 miles to Warner Robins, Georgia, to the second-floor walk-up office of a man named Daniel Coltrane. But before I tell you about Daniel Coltrane, I have to tell you about Maya. Because the woman who walked into that office at 0900 on October 9th was not improvising. She had been planning this fight for 4 months. The disposition meeting was not the start of the story. It was the trap closing on the man who thought he was setting it. I will explain. Maya Thornton was born in Asheville, North Carolina, on the 12th of August, 1986. Her mother, Linda Ellsworth Thornton, RN, had served as a hospital corpsman aboard the USS Sanctuary, the hospital ship that operated off the coast of Vietnam from 67 to 71. Linda had been 20 years old when she boarded the Sanctuary into Nong Harbor and 23 when she walked off it for the last time in Long Beach, California, and she had not, in the 42 years between then and the day her daughter pinned on Petty Officer Second Class, told the daughter more than 3 separate stories about what happened in between. The stories were not dramatic. One was about a sailor who would not let her cut his shirt off because his mother had made it. One was about a Marine who held her hand for 40 minutes while he died of a sucking chest wound and never once asked for morphine because he thought somebody else needed it more. One was about the smell of the laundry on the ship in August, which was the smell of bleach and salt and other things, and which Linda said she could still summon in her nose 40 years later if she was in a room with the wrong kind of fluorescent light. Linda did not tell the third story until Maya was 22 and pinning on her crow. Maya's father, Frank Thornton, was a different kind of operator. Senior Chief Petty Officer, retired. Navy Special Warfare. He was in SEAL Team 2 from 1979 to 1994. I'm going to mention one thing about Frank Thornton in this video, and then I'm not going to come back to him until the end, and I want you to remember that I told you that. In 1982, when Frank Thornton was a young petty officer second class, he served on a 4-man element attached to a Marine reconnaissance detachment in a city called Beirut. The detachment commander was a Marine captain named Walter Williams. Frank Thornton came home from Beirut. Several of the men he served with did not. He did not talk about Beirut. He did not talk about a lot of things. But he kept in a drawer in his desk of the house in Asheville a Christmas card that he received every December from a Walter Williams, USMC, who later transferred to the Air Force and retired as a full colonel and was, in the year 2019, the commanding officer of the 80 Second Mission Support Group at Joint Base in Antonio. Maya did not know about the Christmas cards. She would find out about the Christmas cards on the 10th of October, 2019 at 14:36 hours, when a 64-year-old man in service dress would look up from a photograph and say, "Thornton, are you Frank Thornton's girl?" But that is later. Right now, it is 1994, and Maya is 8 years old, and her father has just retired, and the family has moved from Virginia Beach to a house on a switchback road outside Asheville that has a screened-in back porch and a view through the trees of a slice of the French Broad River about 3/4 of a mile down the slope. The porch has a wooden floor that is painted gray every spring by Frank Thornton because the winter takes the paint off, and the porch has a railing made of 2x4s. And the porch has a German shepherd named Cassie, who is Frank's bomb dog from Little Creek and who he brought home in '94 when the dog was 11 years old and who lived on the porch. Not in the house, on the porch, even in February, because Cassie did not like being indoors until she died in 2001 when Maya was 15. Cassie is the reason Maya joined the Navy. I'm going to be honest with you. I do not usually trust the kind of story that turns on a childhood dog. It is the kind of detail a screenwriter puts in to make you feel something. Real life does not usually work that way. Real life is messy, and the reasons people do things are usually 3 reasons stacked on top of each other, and they don't tell the story to themselves clean until they're 60, and the youngest reason is so far away they have started to make it up. I know this because I have done it myself. But in Maya Thornton's case, the dog is in the paperwork. In 2004, when Maya enlisted, she filled out a form called the Navy Enlisted Classification Preference Sheet. The form has a section where you write, in your own words, why you want a particular rating. Maya asked for Master at Arms with a K9 follow-on, and in the section for reason for preference, she wrote 3 sentences. I have seen the form. It was sent to me by a Navy recruiter named Senior Chief Aaron Wexford, who retired in 2017 and who kept copies of certain enlistment packages because, he told me, some of these kids you remember and some you don't, and the ones you remember you want to be able to prove you knew them. Maya wrote, "My father's dog Cassie taught me that a working dog does not retire. She just stops working. There is a difference. I would like to learn how to do the work she did so that the dogs after her do not stop early." That is what she wrote at 17. The recruiter circled the sentence and forwarded the packet. She went to Recruit Training Command Great Lakes in September of 2004. She graduated. She went to Master at Arms, a school at Lackland Air Force Base, which is where the Navy sends its security forces because the Air Force runs the joint base and the Navy rents the schoolhouse. She graduated. She put in for K9 follow-on. She was told there was a waiting list of 3 years, and that the waiting list got longer for women because the slots for women were administratively separate, and there were fewer of them. Not because of a rule, because of a number, which is the kind of injustice that is the hardest to fight, because there is nobody to be angry at. The number is a number. Somebody said it in 1996. Nobody has updated it. The form has a checkbox. Maya did not argue. She took the waiting list. She did 3 years at Naval Station Norfolk doing gate duty and patrol and getting her associate's degree at night through Old Dominion. In 2008, she got the slot. She went back to Lackland for the K9 course. She was the only woman in her class of 14. She finished second academically and first in handler proficiency. And her first dog was a German shepherd named Argo. And Argo washed out at 18 months because of hip dysplasia, and the second dog was Ghost. Ghost came to her in 2010. He was 4 years old. He had washed out of 2 other handlers, not for aggression, for what the trainers called handler dependency, which is when a dog imprints so hard on one person that it will not work for anybody else. Ghost's first handler had been a Master at Arms named Reyes who took a contractor job in Kuwait in 2009 and could not bring the dog with him. Ghost's second handler was a man named Cobb, who was a perfectly competent handler and a perfectly bad match for the dog. And after 4 months, Ghost had developed a habit of refusing to indicate when Cobb was on the lead, and the kennel master at Lackland, a senior master sergeant named Daphne Crowder, who is going to come back into this story, pulled Ghost off Cobb and said in her own words, "I'm going to give this dog to somebody he can stand to look at, and if that doesn't work, I'll retire him myself." She gave him to Maya. The bond paperwork. And yes, there is bond paperwork. The Department of Defense generates a form for everything, including the certification that a working dog and a handler have achieved operational proficiency together, was signed at 90 days. The normal interval is 120. From 2010 to 2018, Maya Thornton and Ghost deployed together 4 times. Helmand in 2013. Helmand again in 2015, the one with Bowers and the goat track. Anbar province in 2017, attached to a special operations task force I am not going to name because the unit citation is still classified and I am not going to be the one to publish it. Djibouti in 2018, which sounds quiet and was not. 17 confirmed IED finds across the 4 tours. 2 arrests of high-value targets that I cannot describe in detail. 1 incident in Djibouti involving a vehicle-borne device at a gate that I will describe in detail later, because it matters for the disposition letter. 11 Marines, 2 sailors, and a State Department employee named Patricia Oniekwer went home alive who would not have gone home alive otherwise. That is not my count. That is the count from Maya's evaluation in 2018, written by a Marine major named Adelaide Park, who I'm told is now a lieutenant colonel and who I tried to reach for this video and who did not return my calls, and that is fine. Some people don't want to be in a story. I respect that. In April of 2019, Ghost came off operational status. He was 13 years old. He had degenerative joint disease in both hips and a partial hearing loss in the left ear from a flashbang that had detonated 3 feet from his head during a hostage rescue training exercise at Camp Lejeune in 2016. He was, by every standard the Department of Defense has on paper, a retiring military working dog. The path forward under Public Law 106-446, known as Robbie's Law, passed in 2000, which I'm going to explain in a minute, was clear. Maya filed the paperwork for adoption on the 18th of April. She was the handler of record. She had right of first refusal. The paperwork should have been a formality. It was not a formality. It went to the desk of Harold Pierce. I'm going to tell you about Harold Pierce now, and I'm going to ask you to be patient because the most important thing about him is not in his file. It is in what is missing from his file. By the end of this video, you will know what he signed, what he refused to sign, and what he framed on his own wall about himself. The framing is the part that matters. Watch for it. Harold Pierce was 68 years old in April of 2019. He was a retired lieutenant colonel, United States Air Force. He had commissioned out of the Air Force Academy in 1973, and he had flown C-130s out of Clark Air Base in the Philippines from 74 to 78, and he had transferred to a staff career track in 1981 after a back injury that he sustained falling off a forklift at Travis Air Force Base while on a weekend detail that had nothing to do with combat or flying or anything else, and that he never talked about because the version of the back injury that he told at retirement ceremonies and at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall in San Antonio every Wednesday night involved a hard landing in a hostile drop zone in 1977. Nobody had ever checked. Nobody was going to check. He had been a lieutenant colonel for the last 6 years of his active duty career and had retired in 2003, and he had immediately walked across the street, almost literally, into a GS-14 civilian billet as the director of the Department of Defense Military Working Dog Program at Lackland Air Force Base. He had held that billet for 16 years. He was very good at certain parts of the job. He was, by all accounts, a competent budget administrator and a reasonably effective political operator within the Joint Base bureaucracy. He could read a personnel spreadsheet. He could write a memo. He could sit through a quarterly review with the Air Force Security Forces leadership and answer questions about kennel head count and training throughput without sweating. What he could not do, and what he had never done, was actually walk through the kennels at 0500 when the dogs were being fed. He had not been to Afghanistan. He had not been to Iraq. He had not been to Djibouti or Bahrain or Manda Bay. He had been, in his 16 years as director, exactly twice to a forward deployed location, both times to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, and both visits were to attend funerals of dogs killed in transit accidents, which is the kind of trip you take when you want to per diem and a line on your resume, and you do not want to actually be in a place where the work happens. He thought the dogs were inventory. I want to be careful when I say that, because it is the kind of accusation that sounds like editorializing, and I try not to editorialize. So I will tell you why I say it, and you can decide. In 2017, a Master-at-Arms Second Class named Kevin Boucher submitted an adoption petition for his retiring partner, a Belgian Malinois named Rex. Boucher had served with Rex for 3 deployments. Rex had been credited with 2 IED fines and 1 apprehension. Boucher had also, in 2015, taken 17 pieces of shrapnel from an indirect fire attack in Kandahar province. And Rex had been on top of him in the dirt for the 11 minutes between the attack and the arrival of the medevac, and the medevac corpsman, a Navy corpsman named Daniel Espinoza, who I have spoken with, described in his statement that Rex would not let him approach Boucher until Boucher himself reached up and put his hand on the dog's collar and said the word friend, which was the all-clear word that Boucher and Rex had worked out at Lackland 4 years before, and which Espinoza had to be told about by another handler over the radio before Rex would move. Boucher filed his adoption paperwork in March of 2017. The paperwork was complete. It included a veterinary assessment, a home inspection from the Veterans Administration, and a letter of support from Boucher's commanding officer. Pierce signed the disposition recommendation on April 14, 2017. The recommendation was euthanasia. The reason given was, quote, behavioral concerns related to handler-specific aggression patterns, end quote. There was no documentation in Rex's file of any aggression incident. There was no veterinary referral. There was no behavior assessment by a certified Department of Defense canine behaviorist, which is required under the program's own standard operating procedure for any disposition recommendation involving behavioral grounds. Pierce did not refer the case for review. He signed it. The dog was euthanized on April 22, 2017. Boucher was notified by email. The email was sent on a Friday afternoon. Pierce had left for the weekend by the time Boucher read it. Boucher filed a formal grievance through the Navy chain. The grievance was acknowledged. The grievance was forwarded to the Joint Base Inspector General. The Inspector General opened a preliminary inquiry. The preliminary inquiry was at some point in late 2017 downgraded to a routine administrative review. The routine administrative review was, at some point in early 2018, closed without findings. The case file for Rex went into a drawer in the Veterinary Branch Records office and sat there for 3 years. I want you to remember the drawer. I'm going to say it again so you do not forget. The drawer. Rex's file. Hera's file. They sit there for 3 years. The drawer is going to open in this video. When it opens, a man's career ends. Keep it in your head. In 2018, a year after Rex, a similar case was filed by an Army Special Forces handler, Sergeant First Class Marcus Lindholm, 10th Group, out of Fort Carson. His dog was a Dutch shepherd named Hera. Hera was 9 years old. She had 4 deployments to Syria. Her disposition recommendation came back euthanasia. The reason given was, quote, advanced degenerative condition incompatible with civilian quality of life, end quote. There was no veterinary backup. There was no second opinion. Lindholm filed his adoption petition twice. Both filings, according to Lindholm's statement to the Inspector General in 2020, were lost in the administrative process. He has the email receipts. The petitions are signed and dated and received. Pierce's office acknowledged neither one. Era was euthanized on November 9th, 2018. Lindholm was on a deployment rotation in Iraq at the time. He was notified by his rear detachment commander 4 days after the fact. He did not have the option to be present. These two cases, Rex and Hera, are the two cases that come back in the Inspector General report on page 47. I'm telling you about them now because Maya Thornton knew about them in April of 2019, and that is the moment her plan began. She did not know about them from the Inspector General report, which did not exist yet. She knew about them because there's a network. There has always been a network of military working dog handlers across all 4 services, and that network does not run on paper. It runs on email threads and signal groups, and people who served together at Lackland in 2012 calling each other when something does not smell right. Boucher and Lindholm both lived inside that network. So did Maya. So did Senior Master Sergeant Daphne Crowder, the Air Force kennel master who had given Ghost to Maya in 2010 and who, in April of 2019, was preparing to retire after 29 years of service and who had, by her own count, signed off on the adoptions of 143 retiring working dogs across her career and had never, not once, recommended euthanasia for a dog that had a qualified handler waiting for it. Daphne Crowder is 61 years old. She lives now in Schertz, Texas, 15 minutes from Lackland, in a small ranch house with 2 retired German shepherds named Mona and Bartleby, and a husband named Howard who used to be an air traffic controller at Randolph and who is now mostly retired and who fishes in Canyon Lake on Tuesdays. Daphne agreed to talk to me on the condition that I not record her voice and that I describe her physically only in the most general terms. I am honoring that. She is a small woman. She has short gray hair. She wears reading glasses on a chain around her neck. That is all I will say. In the 3rd week of April 2019, Daphne Crowder called Maya Thornton on a Wednesday evening. Maya was at Naval Station Norfolk. Ghost had been formally removed from operational status 6 days earlier. Maya had just submitted her adoption paperwork that morning. The call lasted 41 minutes. I do not have the recording. I do not have a transcript. I have Daphne's recollection, given to me 18 months after the fact, and I have Maya's, given to me 11 months after that, and the 2 recollections agree on the substantive points to a degree that I find credible. Daphne said, I am retiring on the 1st of July. After I am gone, there will be nobody in that building who will stop him. He will sign your paperwork the same way he signed Boucher's. I cannot prove that, but I'm telling you what I have seen for 16 years. Do not file the standard way. File it with a lawyer. File it with the paperwork already perfect. Make him say no in writing. Maya said, who do I call? Daphne said, Daniel Coltrane in Warner Robins. He is a former Marine. He was a JAG. He has done 7 of these cases. He won 6. The 7th one was a dog that actually had a documented bite history, and he still got the dog placed with a sanctuary. He does not lose. Maya said, I cannot afford a lawyer. Daphne said, he does these pro bono. He has done every one of them pro bono. You will pay him $1. That is his fee. He takes $1 so that the contract is legal. Do not insult him by trying to pay him more. Maya called Daniel Coltrane on Thursday morning. I want to introduce Daniel Coltrane properly because he is the second most important human being in this story, and you have not met him yet. Daniel Coltrane is 57 years old. He grew up in Mobile, Alabama, the son of a longshoreman and a high school librarian. He enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1980 and served 4 years in the infantry, including a deployment to Beirut in 1983, where he was part of the security element at the airport in October of that year, and where he was on the morning of October 23rd. In the perimeter wire, approximately 320 meters from the battalion landing team headquarters, when a yellow Mercedes truck drove past him at approximately 6:22 a.m. and detonated. He was 21 years old. He was knocked unconscious by the blast. He woke up 40 minutes later under a piece of corrugated tin. He spent the next 36 hours pulling bodies out of the rubble. He came home in November. He finished his enlistment at Camp Lejeune. He got out in '84, went to college on the GI Bill at the University of South Alabama, went to law school at Tulane, was recalled to active duty as a JAG officer in 1991 during the Gulf War, served as a JAG for 12 years across multiple assignments, retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2003, and has practiced law in Warner Robins, Georgia, since that day. He specializes in two things. He represents disabled veterans in benefits appeals against the Department of Veterans Affairs. And he represents military working dog handlers in adoption disputes against the Department of Defense. He does not take other cases. He does not advertise. His office is on the second floor of a building above a barbecue restaurant called Smokies, which is spelled with an A, which Coltrane finds annoying but tolerates. The office is one room. There's a desk. There are 2 filing cabinets. There's a coffee maker. There's a framed photograph on the wall that I will describe. The photograph is black and white. It shows 3 Marines in 1983 utilities. They're standing in front of a sandbag wall at Beirut International Airport. One of them is Daniel Coltrane at 21 years old. He has a full head of dark hair and a sunburn and a cigarette in the corner of his mouth. The other 2 Marines in the photograph were named Lance Corporal Theodore Briggs and Private First Class Anthony Vargas, and they were inside the battalion landing team headquarters at 6:22 a.m. on October 23rd, 1983, and neither of them came home. Coltrane does not talk about the photograph. He does not need to. It is on the wall. I will tell you something that I will say only once. I was in Beirut in 1983, not at the BLT building. I was a Lance Corporal with a different battalion on a ship offshore, and I did not lose anybody I knew personally in the truck bombing. I knew people who did. I did not know Daniel Coltrane in 1983. I have met him 3 times since I began researching this story. We sat in his office above the barbecue restaurant. We did not talk about Beirut. We talked about Maya, and we talked about Ghost, and we talked about a 68-year-old man named Harold Pierce who had been in San Antonio signing memos while we were pulling bodies out of rubble. I'm going to leave it at that. I told you I was not going to make this video about me. Maya called Coltrane on a Thursday morning in April 2019. The call lasted 19 minutes. He told her to drive to Warner Robins. She drove to Warner Robins the following weekend. She brought everything: Ghost's full operational record, the 4 deployment debriefs, the veterinary file, the bond certification, Major Parks evaluation from 2018, the adoption paperwork she had already filed, the 2 earlier cases, Rex and Hera, printed out from the Signal Group, which Coltrane already had because he had represented Boucher's grievance in 2017 and had been the one who pushed the case to the Inspector General before it got buried. They sat in Coltrane's one-room office for 6 hours on a Saturday. They did not eat lunch. Coltrane drank black coffee from a thermos. Maya drank water from a bottle she had brought from her car. The window behind Coltrane's desk looked out over the parking lot of Smokies, and Maya remembers. This is the kind of detail you do not invent. This is the kind of detail you only get from sitting with someone who actually was there. Maya remembers that there was a yellow Labrador retriever tied to a parking meter in the lot below the window, and that the Labrador stayed tied to the meter for the entire 6 hours, and that at some point in the late afternoon, the dog's owner came out of the restaurant and untied him and gave him a piece of brisket. And Maya thought, looking out the window at that moment, that the dog had been waiting longer than most people would wait for anything and had not complained. She remembers thinking that. She does not know why she remembers it. I am telling you because she told me. Coltrane laid out the strategy. He used a yellow legal pad and a big pen, both of which he still has, and he wrote out, in numbered points, the 11 things that had to happen in a particular order over the next 5 months for the plan to work. Point 1. Maya files a clean adoption petition through standard channels in April. That is the petition she has already filed. It is going to be denied. That is fine. The denial is part of the plan. Point 2. Between April and August, Maya gathers what Coltrane called the package. Independent veterinary assessment by a civilian veterinarian licensed in Texas who has working dog experience. Coltrane already has the name, Dr. Reina Esquivel of San Antonio, who served 4 years as a Navy Veterinary Corps officer and who runs a practice off Wurzbach Parkway. Home inspection by a certified Humane Society inspector. Letter of support from her commanding officer in Norfolk, which she will need to time carefully so that it is dated within 30 days of the eventual appeal filing. Insurance policy for the dog. Coltrane will provide the template. Continuing care plan. Coltrane will provide the template. Sworn statements from 3 handlers who serve with Maya overseas, attesting to Ghost's operational record and disposition. Coltrane will tell her who to ask. Point 3. Maya does not, under any circumstances, contact Pierce's office directly during this 5-month preparation phase. She does not call. She does not email. She does not request a meeting. She does not get on his radar. As far as Pierce knows, she filed her standard petition and is waiting for an answer. The standard petition will sit in his inbox. He will eventually deny it. He will assume she will accept the denial. That assumption is the trap. Point 4. In late August, Maya requests a face-to-face meeting with Pierce to discuss disposition. The meeting will be granted because Pierce grants such meetings as a courtesy to handlers and uses them, in Coltrane's words, as opportunities to deliver bad news in a way that makes him feel paternal. The meeting will be scheduled for early October. Point 5. Maya goes to the meeting alone. She does not bring Coltrane. She does not bring a witness. She does not record. She brings a notebook and a pen. She lets Pierce talk. She does not argue. She does not raise objections. She lets him say everything he has to say. She asks one question at the end. Can I have that in writing? He will say yes. He will provide a written denial. That written denial is what triggers the next phase. Point 6. Within 48 hours of receiving the written denial, Maya files a formal administrative appeal through Coltrane, citing Public Law 106-446 and attaching the full package. The veterinary assessment, the home inspection, the command letter, the insurance, the continuing care plan, the sworn statements. The appeal goes not to Pierce, but to the Air Force Security Forces Center Commander, who has oversight authority over the military working dog program. The appeal copies the Joint Base Commanding Officer. The Joint Base Commanding Officer in October of 2019 will be Colonel Walter Williams, U.S. Air Force. Point 7. Coltrane knows that Williams reads his own mail. Williams is 64 years old, on his last assignment before mandatory retirement, and has a reputation for being, in Coltrane's careful phrase, a person who does not enjoy bureaucratic cowardice. When the appeal hits Williams's desk, with a package that perfect and a record that clean, Williams will not push it down. He will pull Pierce up. Point 8. When Williams pulls Pierce up, Pierce will not have answers. The two prior cases, Rex and Hera, will become relevant. Coltrane has Boucher's full grievance file. Coltrane has Lindholm's statement. Coltrane has the email receipts. Coltrane is going to make sure that file walks into Williams's office along with Maya's appeal, not in the appeal itself. That would be procedurally messy, but in a separate brief attached for context. Point 9. Williams will make a decision within 72 hours. Coltrane is 90% confident the decision will go Maya's way. He is not 100%. There is no such thing as 100% in this work. Pierce has been at Lackland for 16 years. He has friends. Some of them outrank Williams. The fight is not over until Ghost is in the car. Point 10. When the decision comes down, assuming it comes down right, Maya picks up Ghost from the kennel the same day. She does not wait 24 hours. She does not give Pierce time to file his own counter-appeal. She loads the dog in her Subaru and she drives east out of Texas before sundown. She does not stop until she crosses the Louisiana line. She does not stop in Louisiana. She drives all night. She gets to Asheville the following afternoon. Point 11. Within 10 days of Ghost arriving in Asheville, Coltrane files the Inspector General complaint on behalf of Boucher, Lindholm, and Maya as a joint action, attaching all 3 case files. That complaint, Coltrane told her, would not be about Maya anymore. Maya's dog was already home. The complaint would be about the other 2, about Rex, about Hera, about what had happened in the drawer, about the man who had put them there. Maya wrote down all 11 points on the inside cover of her own notebook. She drove back to Norfolk on Sunday. She started executing point 2 on Monday morning. For the next 4 months, she did exactly what Coltrane told her to do. Dr. Esquivel did the veterinary assessment on the 17th of June. The home inspection was completed on the 11th of July. Major Park, who had been promoted to lieutenant colonel by then and was at the Pentagon, signed a letter of support on the 2nd of August, dated forward to the 28th of September per Coltrane's instructions. The insurance policy was bound on the 15th of August. The continuing care plan was finalized on the 22nd. The 3 sworn statements from Marine Gunnery Sergeant named Carlos Vasquez, who had served with Maya in Anbar in 2017, from an Army Staff Sergeant named Hannah Pruitt, who had been the convoy commander on the Djibouti Gate incident in 2018, and from a State Department diplomatic security agent named Robert Uniekwer, who was Patricia Uniekwer's brother and who had been at the gate that day in Djibouti and who insisted on submitting a statement even though Coltrane had not asked for one, were all notarized and on Coltrane's desk by the 8th of September. On the 23rd of September, Maya emailed Pierce's executive assistant, a civilian named Karen Wexler, whose name is going to come up exactly once and then never again, and requested a meeting to discuss the disposition status of MWDG 447. The meeting was scheduled for October 9th at 0900. The trap was set. Pierce did not know it was set. He had been sitting on Maya's April petition for 5 months. He had drafted the denial in July. He had been waiting for her to push so he could refuse her formally and put it behind him. The meeting request was, in his view, the predictable last attempt of a sentimental handler. He intended to be kind. He intended to be firm. He intended, in his own private internal narrative, to give her closure. He had no idea who Daniel Coltrane was. He had not read the Inspector General Preliminary Inquiry from 2017 because it had been closed without findings before it ever got to his level, which was the point of the way it had been closed. He had no idea that Daphne Crowder had spent her last 6 weeks before retirement quietly copying every disposition recommendation he had signed in the last 8 years and walking those copies in a manila folder to a UPS store in Universal City on her last working day at Lackland, the 30th of June, and shipping them overnight to a P.O. box in Warner Robins, Georgia. He had no idea that the man who would receive that package was Daniel Coltrane. He had no idea that the photograph on Coltrane's office wall had 3 faces in it, and that 2 of those faces had been killed at 6:22 on the morning of October 23rd, 1983, in a building that Coltrane had been standing 320 meters away from when it came down, and that Coltrane had, for 36 years now, been carrying a particular kind of patience about men in administrative offices who had not gone where they sent other people, and who signed papers about the lives of those people's dogs. He had no idea. On the morning of October 9th, 2019, Maya Thornton drove from her temporary lodging at the Lackland Inn to Building 682. The drive took 8 minutes. She wore service dress blues. She had pressed them the night before in the room. She had not slept much. Ghost was in the Kennel 3 buildings over. She had visited him at 2100 the night before. He had not eaten his evening kibble. He never did at Lackland. He only ate properly when Maya was nearby. The kennel staff had stopped pretending otherwise. She parked in the visitor lot at 0846. She sat in the car for 4 minutes with the engine off, watching the front entrance of the building, breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6, which is a tactical breathing pattern she had learned at the K9 course in 2008, and which she had used before every IED interdiction she had ever conducted, and which she was using now in a parking lot in Texas, because the fight she was walking into was the same kind of fight, just with different ordnance. At 0850, she got out of the car. At 0852, she walked through the front entrance of Building 682 and signed in with the desk sergeant. At 0856, she was sitting in the waiting area outside Pierce's office on the 2nd floor. At 0901, his executive assistant, Karen Wexler, 54 years old, brown cardigan, reading glasses, a coffee mug on her desk with a picture of 2 grandchildren on it, looked up from her monitor and said, "Petty Officer Thornton, Mr. Pierce will see you now." Maya stood up. She had her notebook in her left hand. She had a pen clipped to the cover. She had her cover tucked under her left arm in the regulation manner. She walked the 11 feet from the waiting area chair to the door of Pierce's office, and she stopped at the doorway, and she said, "Sir, Petty Officer Thornton reporting as ordered." Pierce was behind his desk. He did not stand. He waved her in with his right hand without looking up from a printout he was reading. "Have a seat, Thornton." She sat. The office was 24 feet by 16 feet. The desk was oak. There were 2 windows behind Pierce, both of them with the blinds drawn at a 45-degree angle so that the morning sun came and striped across the carpet. The carpet was industrial gray. On the wall behind the desk were 3 framed items. The first was Pierce's commissioning certificate from the Air Force Academy, dated June 6, 1973. The second was a photograph of AC-130 in flight over what appeared to be the Philippines, with Pierce's signature in the lower right corner. The third was a framed certificate of appreciation from the Department of Defense Military Working Dog Program, signed by Pierce himself in 2011, thanking Pierce for his service to the program. He had framed a certificate he had signed for himself. I'm not making that up. I have seen the photograph of the office wall. It is in the Inspector General Report as Exhibit 14. On the desk, in front of Pierce, was the coffee mug. The coffee mug said "World's Okayest Boss" in block letters on the side facing Maya. It was a joke mug. It was the kind of mug somebody on staff had given him for Christmas at some point, possibly several years ago, possibly as a low-grade insult that he had taken as affection because he was the kind of man who could not tell the difference. He drank from it every morning. He was drinking from it now. He put the mug down. He looked up. "Thornton, I have your file. I have reviewed it. I want to tell you up front that I appreciate what you have done for the program. For deployments. That is a substantial record." "Yes, sir." "Gee, 447 is a fine animal. Was a fine animal. He served honorably." "Yes, sir. I have, however, reviewed the recommendation from the veterinary branch." He picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk. He did not hand it to her. He read from it. Subject, K9G 447, Belgian Malinois, age 10. Condition, degenerative joint disease, bilateral, advanced. Hearing loss, left ear, partial. Recommendation, disposition by chemical means. Justification, animal is past useful life and adoption presents undue liability exposure to the department. He put the sheet down. "I have concurred with the recommendation. The disposition will be carried out by the veterinary branch within 30 days. Maya did not move. I want to slow down here because what happened in the next 90 seconds is the entire fight, and most of it happened in a place where the cameras could not see, which is the inside of Maya Thornton's head. She had practiced this moment with Coltrane on the telephone 3 times in the previous week. He had told her both times the same thing. Do not argue. Do not negotiate. Do not show him a single card. He is going to want a reaction. He is going to want you to ask him to reconsider. He is going to want to feel generous by saying no. Do not give him any of it. Take the denial. Ask for it in writing. Walk out. The moment you walk out, the trap closes. He cannot do anything you have not already prepared for." Maya breathed in for 4 counts. She breathed out for 6. "Sir, may I have the recommendation and your concurrence in writing?" "For my records." Pierce blinked. He had been expecting something else. He had been expecting an argument. He had been expecting tears. He had been expecting the kind of conversation in which he could explain at length why the program had to make hard decisions and why he understood personally how difficult this must be and why she should know that her service was appreciated regardless of the outcome. He had prepared a small speech. He had given the speech several times over the years to several handlers. He was, in his own internal narrative, the kind of leader who delivered hard news with grace. He did not get to give a speech. He recovered in about 2 seconds. "Of course. I can have Mrs. Wexler print you a copy on your way out." "Thank you, sir." "Thornton, I want you to know." "Sir, I do not need any further explanation. The decision is the decision. I appreciate your time." She stood up. She did not salute because they were indoors and uncovered. She came to attention. "By your leave, sir." Pierce nodded. She did a left face. She walked out of the office. She stopped at Karen Wexler's desk. She said, "Mrs. Wexler, Mr. Pierce has authorized a copy of the disposition recommendation and his concurrence. May I wait for it?" Karen Wexler looked through the open door at Pierce. Pierce nodded. Karen Wexler printed 2 sheets of paper. She put them in a manila folder. She handed the folder to Maya. "Thank you, ma'am." "You're welcome, dear." Maya walked down the stairs of building 682. She walked across the parking lot. She got into her Subaru Outback. She put the manila folder on the passenger seat. She closed the door. She put the key in the ignition. She did not cry. She did not start the engine for 90 seconds. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel, and she breathed in for 4 and out for 6, in for 4 and out for 6, 12 times, until her pulse came down from 112 beats per minute to 78. She had a Garmin fitness watch on her left wrist. She had checked her pulse before she walked into the building. She checked it again now. Both numbers are in her after-action notes, which I have. Then she picked up her phone, and she called Daniel Coltrane in Warner Robins, Georgia. It is done. I have the denial in writing. Read it to me. She read it. Good. Drive to me. Do not stop except for fuel. Do not call anyone else. Do not post anything anywhere. I will start drafting the appeal tonight. Understood. Maya. Sir. You did well. She hung up. She started the engine. She drove out of the parking lot at 0917. She drove to the Lackland Inn, packed her duffel in 11 minutes, checked out, drove east on Interstate 10, and she did not stop except for fuel and a sandwich at a Buc-ee's in Luling, Texas, and she pulled into the parking lot below the office above Smokey's Barbecue at 2143 that night, 16 hours and 26 minutes after she had walked out of Pierce's office. Coltrane was still at his desk. The light was on. The drafting had already begun. They worked until 2 in the morning. They worked again the next day, all day. The appeal was filed at 1600 hours on October 10th, 2019. But I have to back up because I told you the trap closed when Maya walked out. And that is true, but the trap had a second jaw, and the second jaw closed at 1436 hours on the same day, October 9th, 2019, in a different office on the same base. Because Maya did not, in fact, drive straight to Georgia. She left building 682 at 0917. She did not get on the interstate. She drove 3/4 of a mile east across the base to building 2000, which is the headquarters building of the 802nd Mission Support Group. She parked. She sat in the car for another 4 minutes. She had not told Coltrane about this. Coltrane did not know. The plan, as he had drafted it on the yellow legal pad in April, did not include this. The plan said, take the denial, drive east, file the appeal through channels in 48 hours. Maya was about to deviate from the plan. I will tell you why, and I will tell you how she knew to do it, and I will tell you what she did not yet know, which is the part that makes the next part possible. In June of 2019, while Maya was executing point 2 of the 11-point plan, she had gone home to Asheville for a long weekend to see her parents. Her father, Frank Thornton, was 71 years old by then. He was healthy. He spent most days in his workshop behind the house. He did not talk much, which had always been true. Her mother, Linda, had retired from the Mission Hospital in Asheville 2 years earlier and spent her days in the garden. On the Saturday evening of that weekend, Maya was sitting on the back porch with her father after dinner. The porch had been repainted that spring. The new paint was a slightly different gray than the old paint, and the wood had a smell that Maya remembered from being 8 years old. Cassie's old porch. Now, it had a different dog on it. A black mutt named Hank that Frank had picked up from the Buncombe County shelter in 2017. Hank was asleep on the porch boards. Frank had a glass of bourbon. Maya had a beer. They were not talking. They sat for about 20 minutes in the particular kind of silence that her father preferred and that she had learned, over the years, was not absence of communication, but a form of it. Then Frank said, "You were working on something." "Yes." "The dog." "Yes." "Tell me." She told him. Not everything. She told him there was a man in San Antonio who was going to try to euthanize Ghost. She told him she was going to fight it. She did not tell him about Coltrane. She did not tell him about the 11-point plan. She just told him the basic situation. Frank listened. He drank his bourbon. He did not interrupt. When she was done, He sat for another minute without speaking. Then he said, "If it comes to it, you should know about Walter Williams." Maya said, "Who?" Frank said, "He commands the support group at Lackland now. Air Force Colonel. He used to be a Marine. I served with him in '82, before you were born." Maya said, "You never told me." Frank said, "I am telling you now." That was all he said about it. He did not explain who Walter Williams was. He did not say what they had done together. He did not say where, except for the year, which was '82. He did not say what had happened. He did not say why the name mattered. He did not say what Williams owed him, or what he owed Williams, or whether there was any debt at all in either direction. He just said the name, and the year, and the rank in the place. Maya wrote the name down that night in her notebook. She did not bring it up again. Frank did not bring it up again. The weekend ended. She drove back to Norfolk on Sunday evening. 3 months later, she was sitting in her Subaru in the parking lot outside Building 2000 at Lackland Air Force Base, with a manila folder on the passenger seat that contained Harold Pierce's signed concurrence in the euthanasia of a Belgian Malinois named Ghost, and she was deciding whether to walk into the headquarters building of a colonel she had never met, without an appointment, without going through her own chain of command, without telling her lawyer, without any procedural cover whatsoever, on the strength of a single sentence her father had said to her on a back porch in June. She was deciding whether her father's single sentence was a tactical asset. She decided that it was. She got out of the car at 0926. She walked into Building 2000. She approached the front desk. The front desk was manned by a staff sergeant named Devin Marsh, United States Air Force, 28 years old, from Mobile, Alabama, 3 years on the desk, very good at his job. He looked up. "Mom." Staff Sergeant, Petty Officer First Class Maya Thornton, United States Navy. "I need to request an appointment with Colonel Williams. Today, if possible. I do not have an appointment. I understand that is unusual. Ma'am, the Colonel is in meetings until at least 1400. Can I ask the nature of the request?" Maya breathed in for 4, out for 6. "It is regarding a military working dog disposition matter. I'm a handler of record. The dog is scheduled for euthanasia. I have a parallel administrative appeal being filed through counsel in Georgia. But I have specific information that I believe the Colonel may want to receive directly. I'm not going through Mr. Pierce's office because Mr. Pierce is the subject of the matter." Staff Sergeant Marsh did not blink. He had been the executive's gatekeeper for 3 years. He had been trained to filter requests. He had also been trained by Williams personally on the first day of the assignment that certain words were not to be filtered. The words working dog were on that list. Williams had told him, "If a handler ever walks in here for a dog, you put them on my calendar. I do not care what else is happening. Find me 30 minutes. Staff Sergeant Marsh said, "Ma'am, please have a seat. I will see what I can do." He picked up the phone. He did not call Williams directly. He called Master Sergeant Camille Ortiz, Williams's senior enlisted advisor, who was at that moment in the conference room down the hall with Williams and 3 other officers, reviewing the Joint Base security posture for an upcoming visit by the Secretary of the Air Force. Ortiz stepped out of the conference room. She picked up the phone at the conference room door. Marsh told her what was sitting in the lobby. Ortiz said, "Hold." She went back in the conference room. She wrote a note on a yellow sticky and slid it across the table to Williams. The note said, "MWD Handler, Disposition Appeal, K9 issue, lobby, asking for 30 minutes. Williams read the note. He looked up at Ortiz. He nodded once. He went back to the security briefing. The security briefing ended at 14:22. At 14:31, Master Sergeant Ortiz walked down the hall to the lobby. Petty Officer Thornton. Maya stood up. She had been in a lobby chair for 5 hours and 5 minutes. She had not eaten. She had not used the bathroom in the building because she had not wanted to leave the lobby and miss the call. She had drunk 1 cup of water from the water fountain at 12:30. She had read the same page of the Air Force Times magazine on the side table approximately 40 times. She had not looked at her phone. She had not called Coltrane. Mom, the colonel will see you. 5 minutes. Do not waste them. Yes, ma'am. Maya followed Ortiz down the hall. They walked past the conference room. They walked past 2 more offices. They came to a door at the end of the corridor. The door had a nameplate that said COL W. Williams, USAF, in white letters on a blue background. Ortiz knocked once and opened the door. Sir, Petty Officer Thornton, bring her in. Maya walked in. Ortiz closed the door behind her and remained outside. Walter Williams was sitting behind his desk. He was 64 years old. He was a small man, 5'7", maybe 160 pounds. His hair was gray. He had reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was in service dress blues with command pilot wings and a Joint Service Achievement Medal and a row of ribbons that started with a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with Valor Device. He had transferred from the Marine Corps to the Air Force in 1986 after Beirut, after a back-channel arrangement that had involved a flight surgeon and an aviation slot and a recommendation letter from a lieutenant general whose name does not matter for this story. And he had spent the next 33 years in the Air Force flying first C-141s and then C-17s and then a desk. And he was, in October of 2019, 6 months from mandatory retirement. He looked up from his desk. He looked at Maya. His eyes went to her name tape. He read it. Then he looked at her face. He looked at her face for about 4 seconds longer than he needed to. Then he said, Thornton, are you Frank Thornton's girl? I want to stop the clock here because this is the sentence the entire video has been moving toward. And most of you did not know it was the sentence until I said it. Frank Thornton, Beirut, 1982. A Marine captain named Walter Williams. A Christmas card in a drawer that Maya did not know about. 4 months of preparation, a yellow legal pad, an 11-point plan, a sealed photograph in a glove box, and underneath all of it, a single sentence on a back porch in June. If it comes to it, you should know about Walter Williams. That was the asset. This is the moment it pays. Maya breathed in for 4, out for 6. Yes, sir. Williams set down the pen he had been holding. He did not say anything for a long moment. His face did not change. He was not a man whose face changed. He had spent his career in cockpits and offices, and he had learned, somewhere in the first 10 years, that what your face does is a kind of broadcasting, and that broadcasting was a thing you did on purpose or not at all. He said, How is your father? He is well, sir. He is in Asheville now. Yes, sir. Is he still working on that boat? Maya almost smiled. She did not. She kept her face exactly as it had been. He finished the boat in 2008, sir. He sold it in 2012. He is working on a porch swing now. A porch swing. Yes, sir. Williams nodded slowly. He picked up his pen. He sat down again. He said, Sit down, petty officer. Maya sat down. Tell me about your dog. Maya reached into the folder she had brought from her car. She did not pull out the disposition letter. She did not pull out the veterinary file. She did not pull out the 11-point plan. She pulled out one item. It was a photograph. It was a 4x6 print, black and white, with a slight curl in one corner from having been in a footlocker in Anbar province for 6 weeks in 2017, and then in a glove box in Norfolk for 2 years after that. It showed 3 Marines and a dog behind a Hesco wall in Helmand province in June of 2015. The Marines were Caleb Bowers, Esteban Mata, and a third Marine whose face was turned away from the camera and whose name does not matter to this story. The dog was Ghost. Bowers had his arms around Ghost's neck. The picture had been taken at 07 minutes past noon, local time, on June 4th, 2015, by Corporal Esteban Mata, and it was the picture that Mata had taken without asking permission, and which he had emailed to Maya 6 weeks later when he rotated home, and which Maya had printed at a CVS in Norfolk in August of 2015 and had carried with her, in one form or another, ever since. She slid the photograph across the desk. Williams looked at it. He looked at it for 10 seconds. He picked it up. He held it closer. He put his reading glasses on. He looked at it for another 15 seconds. He set it down. He said, "Tell me what this is." Maya told him. She told him about San Jin. She told him about the goat track. She told him about Caleb Bowers, who was now 23 years old and out of the Marine Corps and working as a lineman for the Tennessee Valley Authority in Athens, Tennessee, and who had 2 children and who sent Maya a Christmas card every December that began with the same sentence, which was, "Ghost is the reason this card exists." She told him about the 17 IED finds. She told him about the 11 Marines. She told him about the Djibouti gate, which I have not told you about yet, and which involved a Toyota Hilux with 3 barrels of ammonium nitrate in the bed and a driver who did not look right, and a dog who sat down at the vehicle barrier and refused to move, and a gate guard named Hannah Pruitt who held her fire for the extra 4 seconds it took for Maya to read what Ghost was telling her, and a vehicle that was disabled by small arms fire from the guard tower at a range of 40 meters. An State Department employee named Patricia Oniekwer, who was inside the gate at the time and who would not have been inside any gate ever again if the dog had been wrong. She told him about Harold Pierce. She told him about Karen Wexler. She told him about the world's okayest boss mug. She told him about the disposition recommendation. She told him about the line in the recommendation that read past useful life. She did not, in this meeting, tell him about Boucher. She did not tell him about Lindholm. She did not tell him about Daniel Coltrane. She did not tell him about Daphne Crowder or the manila folder shipped from a UPS store in Universal City. She did not tell him about the 11-point plan or the 4 months of preparation or the formal appeal that was being drafted at that moment in an office above a barbecue restaurant in Warner Robins, Georgia. She told him about her dog. She told him about the picture. She told him about a man in San Antonio who had decided, with a pen, that the dog in the picture was past useful life. She was finished at 14:41. She had used 10 minutes. She had been authorized 5. Williams did not look at his watch. He picked up the photograph again. He looked at it for another long moment. Then he picked up his desk phone. He dialed an internal extension. The extension was 4 digits. I will not give you the digits because they're still in use. The extension rang twice. A voice on the other end said, "Veterinary branch. This is..." Williams said, "Put Pierce on the phone." There was a pause. The voice on the other end said, "Sir, Mr. Pierce is..." "Put Pierce on the phone." There was another pause. There was the sound of a phone being transferred. Then there was Pierce's voice. "This is Pierce." Williams said, "Harold, this is Walter Williams." "Colonel, good afternoon." "Harold, you're going to find that policy you're quoting was rescinded by the secretary in 2015. There was silence on the other end of the line. I'm not going to tell you what Williams said after that. I have it. I'm not going to put it in this video. I'm going to give you the first sentence, and I'm going to leave the rest to your imagination. In your imagination, if you have ever sat across a desk from a man like Walter Williams in a moment like that one, will not have to work very hard. The call lasted 4 minutes. Williams did not raise his voice once. When he hung up the phone, he looked at Maya. He said, "Petty Officer Thornton, I am going to authorize the release of MWDG 447 to your custody, effective tomorrow morning at 0900. The paperwork will be on Mrs. Wexler's desk by 1800 today. You will pick up your dog at the kennel, and you will sign the release forms, and you will leave this base. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "One more thing. Sir, tell your father I said hello." Maya stood up. She came to attention. "Yes, sir. I will, sir." Dismissed. She did a left face. She walked out of the office. Master Sergeant Ortiz was in the hallway. Ortiz did not say anything. Maya walked past her, down the corridor, through the lobby, past Staff Sergeant Marsh, who looked up but did not speak, out the front door across the parking lot, and got into her Subaru. She closed the door. She put her hands on the steering wheel. She did not cry then either. She had not yet earned crying. There were still 23 hours and 12 minutes between her and the moment Ghost would be in the back seat of her car with his head on the rear armrest and Texas in the rearview mirror. She started the engine. She drove to the Lackland Inn. She went up to her room. She called Daniel Coltrane in Warner Robins, Georgia. He answered on the second ring. She said, "Counselor, I have to tell you what I just did." There was a pause. Coltrane said, "Tell me." She told him. When she was done, there was a longer pause. Then Coltrane said something that Maya did not expect. He said, "Maya, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to think before you answer." "Yes, sir." "Did your father tell you to do that?" She paused. She had not thought about it that way. She thought about it now. "No, sir. He told me a name. He told me a year. He did not tell me what to do with it." I decided. There was another pause on the line. Then Coltrane said, "Good. That is the right answer. Get some sleep. Pick up the dog tomorrow. Drive east. Call me from Louisiana." "Yes, sir." She hung up. She did not sleep much. She lay on her back on the bed in the Lackland Inn, and she stared at the ceiling tiles. There was a water stain on one of them in the shape. She thought, in the way you think when you have been awake for 19 hours, in the shape of the state of West Virginia. She did not know why she was thinking about West Virginia. She had never been to West Virginia. Her grandmother on her mother's side had been from a town called Beckley in Raleigh County, and that was the only connection she had to the state, and she had never met the grandmother. And she fell asleep at approximately 02:30 thinking about a woman she had never met who had grown up in a state Maya had never been to. She woke up at 05:45. She was in the kennel parking lot at 08:50. The kennel master on duty was a technical sergeant named Reuben Halverson, Air Force, 31 years old, who had taken over the daily kennel operation from Daphne Crowder when she retired. Halverson had been briefed at 0700 that morning by Master Sergeant Ortiz, who had walked over from Building 2000 specifically to deliver the news in person, because that was the kind of thing Ortiz did when she wanted to make sure the news arrived without modification. Halverson had the release forms ready on a clipboard. He had Ghost out of his kennel and in a holding bay, leashed with a Department of Defense military working dog retirement tag clipped to his collar. Maya walked into the holding bay at 08:58. Ghost saw her. He did not run to her. He had never run to her. That was not the kind of dog he was. He stood up from the concrete floor, and he walked the 8 feet to where she was standing, and he sat down on her left heel in the heel position he had been taught at 0600 every morning for 9 years. And he put his head against her thigh. And he closed his eyes. Maya put her hand on the top of his head. She did not say anything. Technical Sergeant Halverson did not say anything either. After about 20 seconds, Halverson cleared his throat and held out the clipboard. Petty Officer Thornton. 3 signatures. Top of page 1, middle of page 2, bottom of page 3. She signed. She handed the clipboard back. Halverson tore off the carbon copies. He handed her the pink set. He kept the white set. He said, "Petty officer. Off the record. Yes. That dog ate this morning. First time in 6 days." Maya looked at Halverson. Halverson looked back at her. He was a tall man, 6'3", broad through the shoulders, blonde hair cut to regulation, blue eyes. He had 2 children, ages 4 and 7. He had been a kennel handler before he was a kennel master. He had loved a dog once. He did not say so. He did not need to. The information was in the way he said the sentence about the kibble. Maya said, "Thank you, Sergeant." Halverson said, "Get him out of Texas." She got him out of Texas. She walked Ghost out the side door of the kennel building. She did not walk him past the front office. She did not walk him past the veterinary branch wing. She walked him along the back fence line, 200 yards, to where her Subaru was parked under a mesquite tree at the far end of the staff lot. She had backed the car in. The hatchback was already open. She had laid out an old wool blanket, gray with a red stripe down the middle. The blanket that had been on her father's couch in the den when she was a child, which Linda had given her in 2015 when Maya had asked for something for Ghost to sleep on overseas, and which had been on a footlocker in Helmand, and a cot in Anbar, and the floor of a guard shack in Djibouti, and which now had Ghost's smell on it permanently and would have it until the blanket itself fell apart, which was going to be in about another 4 years across the cargo area. Ghost jumped into the back. He turned around once. He lay down on the blanket. He put his head on his front paws. Maya closed the hatch. She got in the driver's seat. She started the engine at 0914. She drove out of the parking lot. She drove off the base through the Valley High Gate. She got onto Interstate 10 East at 0931. She set the cruise control at 73. She did not turn on the radio. She drove. I'm going to skip the drive. The drive is 1,600 miles. It is fuel stops and a sandwich in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and a motel in Meridian, Mississippi, where she paid an extra $20 in cash to the night manager to bring Ghost into the room because the motel was not pet-friendly and the night manager was a woman in her 60s who saw Ghost in the back seat and said, "Honey, that is not a pet, that is a roommate," and waved off the 20 and gave Maya the key. She drove into Asheville at 1446 on the 11th of October, 2019. Her father was on the porch. He was sitting on a wooden bench. The bench was the porch swing he had been building in June, finally finished and hung that September. He had a coffee mug in his right hand. He was wearing a flannel shirt, green and gray, and jeans and the same brown work boots he had owned since approximately 1996. He stood up when the Subaru came up the driveway. Linda came out of the house through the screen door. Maya parked. She opened the hatch. Ghost jumped out. He looked at the porch. He looked at Frank. He looked at Linda. He walked, in no particular hurry, up the 3 steps onto the porch, and he sat down at Frank's left heel. Frank looked down at the dog. He did not bend down. He did not say anything for about 10 seconds. Then he put his hand on the top of the dog's head. The same gesture Maya had used in the holding bay at the kennel 28 hours earlier. Frank said, "Hello, Ghost." The dog did not move. Frank looked up at Maya. He said, "You did good, kid." That was the entire conversation. There was no further conversation about Walter Williams. There was no conversation about Beirut. There was no conversation about the photograph or the phone call or the world's okayest boss mug or the 4 months of preparation or the 11-point plan or Daniel Coltrane or Daphne Crowder. Frank did not ask her about any of it. He never asked her about any of it. He never would. Linda made coffee. They sat on the porch. The 3 of them. The dog at Frank's feet. The mountains in the distance. The French Broad River down the slope through the trees. The afternoon light coming in at the low angle it comes in at an October in Asheville, which is a particular color of yellow that does not exist anywhere else, and which I'm told by people who have lived there their whole lives is the only reason anyone stays. Maya drank her coffee. She did not cry that day either. She would cry eventually. She would cry on the 14th of October, 3 days later, alone in the upstairs bathroom of her parents' house at 2300 hours, sitting on the closed lid of the toilet with a hand towel pressed against her face for approximately 4 minutes. She would not cry again about Ghost, or about Pierce, or about the 4 months. She had used her allotment. That was fine, but I have to back up again because while Maya was driving east across Louisiana, the second jaw of the trap was still doing its work in Texas. On the morning of the 10th of October, 2019, the same morning Maya was at the Lackland in calling Coltrane and packing her duffel. Daniel Coltrane was in his office above Smokies at 0600 Eastern. He had not slept either. He had drafted the formal administrative appeal overnight. The appeal was 19 pages long with 22 exhibits attached. Exhibit 1 was the disposition recommendation signed by Pierce. Exhibit 2 was the concurrence Pierce had handed Maya. Exhibits 3 through 11 were the package, veterinary assessment, home inspection, command letter, insurance binder, continuing care plan, 3 sworn statements. Exhibits 12 through 20 were copies of every Department of Defense and Air Force document that had ever been published describing the proper application of Public Law 106-446, with the relevant passages highlighted in yellow. Exhibits 21 and 22 were the file on Lance Corporal Boucher's dog, Rex, and the file on Sergeant First Class Lindholm's dog, Hera. Coltrane filed the appeal at 0900 Eastern. He filed it by fax. Coltrane still used fax because fax produces a confirmation receipt that no email system can match to the office of the Air Force Security Forces Center Commander at Lackland, with copies to the commanding officer of the 802nd Mission Support Group, the Joint Base Inspector General, and the office of the Air Force Surgeon General. He sent a courtesy copy by certified mail to the desk of Harold Pierce at Building 682. The certified mail copy arrived on Pierce's desk on the morning of the 11th of October. By that point, Pierce had already received the call from Williams, signed the release authorization for Ghost, and watched, through the window of his office on the second floor, a gray Subaru Outback with North Carolina plates leaving the Valley High Gate at 0933 on the previous morning. He had thought it was over. He opened the certified envelope at 0942. He read the cover page. He read the index of exhibits. He sat at his desk for several minutes. Karen Wexler, who was at her own desk in the outer office, looked through the open door at one point and saw him with one hand flat on the desk and the other holding the document at arm's length, the way a man holds a thing that has just become heavier than he expected. She did not say anything. She went back to her work. At 10:11, Pierce picked up his phone. He called the Air Force Security Forces Center Commander directly. The Security Forces Center Commander was a Brigadier General named Eloise Markham. She did not take the call. Her executive officer took the call. Pierce asked to schedule a meeting. The executive officer said the general was traveling and not available for the next 10 business days. Pierce said it was urgent. The executive officer said, "Sir, the general is aware of the matter. She has read Mr. Coltrane's filing. She is reviewing it. She will be in touch with you when she has decided how to proceed." That was the sentence. When she has decided how to proceed. Pierce hung up the phone. He spent the rest of October 11th trying to make calls. He called 3 different offices in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He called the Air Force Personnel Center. He called a retired Major General he had known socially in the early 2000s, who was now a consultant in Northern Virginia. None of the calls produced results. 2 of them were not returned at all. I want to describe what was happening underneath the surface because Pierce did not understand it, and the not understanding is the point. Daniel Coltrane had spent 36 years building a particular kind of professional reputation in a particular kind of community. He had represented 17 disabled veterans before the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims, and he had won 14 of those cases. He had represented 6 military working dog handlers in adoption disputes, and he had won all 6. He had argued 1 case before the Federal Circuit, and he had won it. He had testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee in 2011 on a question of veterans' due process, and he had done so without notes. And the chairman of the committee, who was a Republican from Oklahoma and not the kind of man who paid compliments easily, had said into a hot microphone after Coltrane left the witness table, "That was the cleanest 20 minutes of testimony I have heard in 14 years." When Daniel Coltrane's name appeared on a fax cover sheet on the desk of Brigadier General Eloise Markham, it was not an unknown name. It was, in fact, a name she had heard 6 months earlier at a dinner in Washington from a Marine lieutenant general who had said, in passing, while discussing a different matter, "If Coltrane ever files something on your desk, Eloise, do not slow walk it. Read it the day it arrives. The man does not file unless he is going to win." She had read it. She had read it the day it arrived. She had also, in the 4 hours after she read it, made 3 telephone calls. The first was to her own Inspector General, asking what was in the file on the 2 prior cases, Rex and Hera. The Inspector General said, "Ma'am, there is a preliminary inquiry from 2017 that was downgraded and closed. The file is still in the records office. I have not personally reviewed it in detail." She said, "Review it today." The second call was to the Air Force Surgeon General's office, asking for the official position of the Veterinary Corps on the standard veterinary basis for euthanasia recommendations involving advanced age working dogs with qualified handler adoption requests pending. The Surgeon General's office said they would get back to her by close of business. They did. The official position was that euthanasia was, in such cases, a last resort, and that the operative governing document was the Robbie Memorandum of 2015, which Pierce had not been applying. The third call was to the office of Colonel Walter Williams. That call lasted 22 minutes. I do not know what was said. I have not been able to confirm the contents of that call with either party, and I'm not going to speculate. I will only say that Williams and Markham had served together at the Pentagon from 2009 to 2011, and that Williams's reputation within the Air Force Security Forces community was, in a phrase I have heard from 3 different officers, a man who does not waste a general officer's time. By the close of business on the 11th of October, Brigadier General Markham had read the appeal, reviewed the prior case files, consulted with the Surgeon General, and spoken with Williams. She had not yet decided what to do about Pierce, but she had decided that what she was looking at was not a single contested adoption. It was a pattern. She referred the matter to the Joint Base Inspector General at 0800 on the morning of the 14th of October. The Inspector General opened a full, formal investigation on the same day. The investigation was assigned to a senior investigator named Lieutenant Colonel Hyunjin Park, USAF, a 38-year-old former intelligence officer with a law degree from George Washington University who had transferred into the IG career field in 2015 and who was, in Coltrane's later assessment, the best IG investigator I have ever seen on the Air Force side. Park requested every disposition recommendation Pierce had signed in the previous 8 years. There were 241 of them. Daphne Crowder's manila folder, the one she had shipped from the UPS store in Universal City on June 30th, the one that sat in Coltrane's filing cabinet in Warner Robins, the one that contained copies of every disposition memo Crowder had been able to lay hands on during her last 6 weeks at the kennel, was already sitting on Coltrane's desk. Coltrane sent it to Park on the 17th of October by overnight courier, accompanied by a one-page cover letter that did not explain how the documents had come into his possession and that Park, to her credit, did not ask about. Park's investigation took 5 months. In the course of those 5 months, she identified 11 cases, including Rex, Hera, and Ghost, in which Pierce had signed euthanasia recommendations for retiring military working dogs where qualified adopters had submitted complete petitions and where the veterinary record did not support the disposition justification cited in the memo. She identified 23 additional cases in which the procedural requirements of the program had not been followed. She identified, through interviews with 18 current and former kennel personnel, a consistent pattern of behavior in which Pierce treated adoption petitions as administrative nuisances and euthanasia recommendations as the default disposition for any retiring dog over the age of 8. She also identified, in the course of those interviews, that Daphne Crowder had, on 4 separate occasions between 2015 and 2019, formally objected to Pierce's recommendations in writing, and that none of those objections had been retained in the official program records, and that all 4 objection memos had subsequently been located in Crowder's personal files, dated and signed and time-stamped, which constituted prima facie evidence that the program's records had been altered or improperly maintained. The Park report was finalized on the 2nd of March, 2020. It ran to 174 pages. I have read it. The full report is not public. Most of it is FOUO, for official use only. But the executive summary in Section 6, which contains the findings, were released in redacted form in May of 2020 in response to a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a journalist named Tony Brennan of the San Antonio Express-News, who wrote a 4-part series on the matter that ran from June 12th to June 15th, 2020, in which I am also going to leave in the description below this video. The paragraph that everybody quoted at the time, the paragraph that is now sometimes called the Park paragraph in the small community of people who pay attention to this work, is on page 47 of the report. It reads in full: the disposition program under the current civilian director demonstrates a systemic preference for euthanasia over adoption, contrary to current Department of Defense policy and the spirit of Public Law 106-446. This preference appears to be administrative in origin rather than veterinary. The director's stated rationale of liability exposure is not supported by any documented adverse event in the program's history. In the 18-year period covered by available records, no successful adoption of a retired military working dog has resulted in litigation against the department. The director's pattern of recommendation is therefore not a response to evidence. It is a policy preference held by one individual, applied without external review, and resulting in the death of animals whose adoption was both lawful and supportable. That paragraph ended Harold Pierce's career. It did not end it immediately. Bureaucracies do not work that way. Pierce was placed on administrative leave on the 11th of March, 2020. He was formally removed from the director position on the 14th of May. He retained his GS-14 civilian status during the disciplinary process. He was offered the option of voluntary retirement in lieu of removal, which he accepted on the 2nd of July, 2020. He left federal service on the 31st of August, 2020. He did not, as far as I can determine, ever publicly comment on the matter. He moved from San Antonio to a town in Central Florida. I'm not going to name it because his wife still lives there and she was not part of this. And he is, as of the production of this video, still alive. He is 74 years old. He does not give interviews. I have not attempted to contact him. There is nothing I would want him to say. The program at Lackland was reorganized in the summer of 2020. The director position was restructured to require active duty or recently retired military veterinary experience. The new director, who took the position in September 2020, was a recently retired Army colonel and veterinarian named Helmand Subramanian, who had served 26 years in the Veterinary Corps and who had personally signed adoption recommendations for 61 retiring working dogs over her career. The program adoption rate for retiring dogs over the age of 8, which had been approximately 22% under peers, climbed to 91% in the 12 months after the reorganization. Boucher received a formal letter of acknowledgement from the Department of the Air Force on the 12th of November, 2020. It did not bring Rex back. It did not apologize because the Department of the Air Force does not apologize in formal correspondence as a matter of policy. It expressed regret that proper procedures had not been followed. Boucher framed the letter. He hung it on the wall of his living room in Pensacola, Florida, where he now works as a civilian contractor doing canine training for the Pensacola Police Department. He told me in a phone conversation in the spring of 2022, it was not enough, but it was something, and something is what most of us never get. Lindholm received a similar letter. He did not frame his. I do not know what he did with it. He did not want to be in this video, and I am honoring that. Daphne Crowder retired to her house in Schertz, Texas, on the 1st of July, 2019, 3 months before the meeting in Pierce's office. She did not return to Lackland. She did not attend any of the investigation proceedings. She did not speak publicly. Tony Brennan attempted to interview her for the Express News series, and Crowder declined. She told me, when I sat with her in her living room in March of 2022, with Mona and Bartleby asleep on the rug at our feet, my job was to make sure that when I left, somebody had what they needed. I did my job. The rest was not my fight anymore. I asked her, was it worth it? She thought about it for a long time. About 30 seconds. That is a long time when you're sitting across a coffee table from someone. She said, 29 years of paperwork and only one folder ever mattered. Yes, it was worth it. That was all she said about it. I'm going to give you one more scene, and then I'm going to bring you back to the porch in Asheville, and then we're done. Ghost lived for 2 years and 4 months after he came home to Asheville. I want to give you those 2 years and 4 months honestly, because the easy version of this story would compress them into a single sentence. He lived out his retirement in peace, and the easy version would be a lie. Retirement was not peaceful for the first 90 days. It was, in fact, the hardest 90 days of the dog's life since he had washed out from his first handler in 2009. Working dogs do not understand retirement. They understand the absence of work, which feels to a working dog like a punishment for something the dog cannot identify. Ghost spent the first 3 weeks in Asheville pacing. He paced the porch. He paced the kitchen. He stood at the front door for hours waiting to be put in a vehicle. He did not eat well. He woke up at 04:30 every morning because 04:30 was the time he had been woken up at every morning for 9 years. And he stood at the foot of Maya's bed in the upstairs guest room of her parents' house. And he stared at her face until she opened her eyes, because that was the protocol. He did not know there was no longer a protocol. Maya called Daniel Coltrane on the 24th of October, 2019. She said, "He is not adjusting." I did not know what to do. Coltrane said, "Give him a job." She said, "What job?" Coltrane said, Any job. It does not matter what. He needs to be useful to you. Find him something. He will tell you if it is enough. Maya thought about it for 2 days. On the 26th of October, she drove with Ghost to the Buncombe County Animal Shelter in Asheville, and she spoke with the shelter director, a woman named Patrice Alcott, 52 years old, who had run the shelter for 14 years. And she asked if there was any way a retired military working dog could be useful in a shelter environment. Patrice Alcott looked at her for about 10 seconds, and then she looked at Ghost, who was sitting at Maya's left heel in the shelter lobby and not moving, and she said, "Honey, I have got 11 dogs in the back who came in this month and who do not know how to be dogs. They have never lived with another dog. They have never been in a kennel that did not feel like a punishment. Can your dog teach them how to settle?" Maya said, "I do not know. He has never done that work." Patrice said, "Let us find out." Ghost spent the next 2 years working at the Buncombe County Animal Shelter 4 mornings a week. He did not train dogs. He did not do anything you would call active intervention. He sat. He sat in the common area on a wool blanket, the same gray with a red stripe blanket from the back of the Subaru, which moved with him, and he allowed traumatized shelter dogs to approach him at their own pace and lie down near him. And he taught them, by example, that it was possible to be in a kennel and not be afraid. The shelter staff started calling him the Deacon. That nickname was not Maya's. She did not particularly like it. She allowed it because the dogs at the shelter responded to it, and Ghost did not seem to care one way or the other what the humans called him as long as the work was real, which it was. By December of 2019, Ghost was eating again. By February of 2020, he had stopped waking up at 04:30. By the summer of 2020, he had developed a new habit, which was that he would walk down the slope behind Frank Thornton's house to a particular flat rock about 120 yards down toward the river. And he would lie on the flat rock in the afternoons, and he would watch the French Broad River move past, and Frank, who was 72 by then, and slower than he had been, and who had taken to walking with a cane on the steeper parts of the property, would walk down to the flat rock with him most days and sit on a folding camp stool he kept down there for that purpose. And the two of them would sit, the old seal and the old Malinois, and they would not do anything else. They would just sit. Linda took a photograph of them once in October of 2020 from the porch with a telephoto lens. The photograph shows the two of them from behind. Frank in the green flannel shirt on the camp stool, leaning forward with his hands on the cane. Ghost on the rock to his left, head up, looking down toward the water. The light is the October Asheville yellow. You can see in the photograph that the dog and the man are both looking at the same point in the river, which is approximately 40 yards downstream, where the water breaks over a submerged log and forms a small white riffle. That photograph is in the Thornton family living room now. It is on the mantle. It is in a wooden frame Frank made himself in the workshop behind the house. Out of a piece of black walnut he had been saving for 30 years for the right project, and which he told Maya when she asked, he had finally found the right project for. Ghost died on the 11th of February, 2022. He was 16 years old. He had developed a tumor on his spleen in the previous November. The veterinarian, Dr. Esquivel of San Antonio, the same vet who had done the original assessment in June of 2019, with whom Maya had stayed in contact and who had been managing Ghost care by telephone in coordination with a local Asheville practice, had told Maya in December that the tumor was inoperable at his age and that they were now in palliative time. Maya understood. She had known they were going to be in palliative time eventually. Every handler knows. It is the last thing you sign up for when you sign up for the work. He died at home. He died on the porch. I am going to give you the morning, because the morning is the entire point of this video, And if I do not give it to you, I have wasted your 0700 was 41 degrees Fahrenheit, which is approximately 5 degrees Celsius. Time in mind, it was a Friday morning. The sky was clear. The temperature on the porch at Ghost had not been able to walk down to the flat rock for about 3 weeks by that point. He had been sleeping on the porch on a heated pad Maya had bought him in January. He had been refusing food for 2 days. Maya had called Dr. Esquivel on the previous evening, and they had agreed that if the dog did not eat that morning, Maya would call the local Asheville vet, Dr. Aaron Bellwether, who made house calls, and they would do at the house. He did not eat that morning. Maya called Dr. Bellwether at 0752. He said he would be there by 0930. She sat with Ghost on the porch from 0800 to 0930. She did not bring her phone. She did not bring a book. She sat on the porch swing, the one Frank had built, and Ghost was on the heated pad at her feet, and Frank was in the kitchen with Linda making coffee. And at some point around 0840, the screen door opened, and Frank came out with 2 mugs and handed one to Maya and sat down on the swing next to her, and the 2 of them sat with the dog and did not speak for the next 50 minutes. Dr. Bellwether arrived at 0928. He was a quiet man, late 50s, tall and thin. He had brought a small case with him. He set the case down on the porch boards. He kneeled next to Ghost. He put his hand on the dog's flank. He looked at Maya. "Are you ready?" "No. Take whatever time you need." Maya got down on the floor of the porch. She put her face against the side of Ghost's head, against the place where she had put her hand on the top of his head in the kennel holding bay in San Antonio 2 years and 4 months earlier, against the place she had touched 10,000 times in the back seat of vehicles and the corners of guard shacks and the floors of FOBs across 3 continents and 4 deployments. She put her face there. She breathed in. She breathed out. She said, "You can go. I am here. You can go." Ghost exhaled. He did not exhale in any dramatic way. He just exhaled, the way he had exhaled 10 million times in his life. Dr. Bellwether administered the first injection, which was the sedative, and Ghost's body relaxed in the way that a working dog body almost never relaxes, because working dogs do not relax fully even in sleep, and Maya felt. She told me, when I sat with her on the same porch in May of 2022, Maya felt the dog let go of something he had been holding for 16 years. And the letting go was not sad in that moment. The letting go was the kindest thing she had ever felt happen in her hands. Dr. Bellwether administered the second injection. Ghost was gone by 0941. Maya stayed on the porch floor for about 20 minutes. Frank stayed on the swing. Linda came out at some point and sat on the swing on Frank's other side. Dr. Bellwether packed up his case. He did not bill her. She tried to pay him by check 3 days later, and he returned the check uncashed with a note that said only, "Thank you for letting me be there." They buried Ghost on the flat rock above the river. Frank dug the hole himself. It took him most of the afternoon. He was 74 by then. Maya offered to help twice. He waved her off both times. He had a particular spade he had used for 30 years, and he used it that day. He took breaks. Linda brought him water. The hole was deep enough by sundown. They put Ghost in the ground in the wool blanket, the gray with a red striped blanket, the one from the couch in 1995, the one from the back of the Subaru. They folded it over him. Maya put one item in the grave. It was the small carabiner clip from his tactical vest, the one he had worn in Sanjin in Anbar at the Djibouti gate on every working day of 9 years, which had been in a drawer in her dresser for 2 years and 4 months, and which she did not need to keep because the dog was the thing, not the clip. Frank filled in the hole. They marked the spot with a piece of flat slate that Frank had pulled out of the creek bed at the bottom of the property in the spring of 2020 in which he had been keeping in the workshop without knowing why, in which he carved that week with a single line. The line was, "Ghost." Worked. That was all. No datas. No serial number. No rank for a dog because a dog does not have a rank. Just the name and the verb in the past tense, and a flat slab of slate on a flat rock above the French Broad River in October yellow afternoon light on a piece of land that Frank Thornton had bought in 1994 with the lump sum of his retirement, on a slope above a river in a state his daughter had been born in, 2,000 miles from a goat track in Helmand where a Belgian Malinois had sat down in the dirt on June 4th, 2015, and refused to let a 19-year old Lance Corporal from Athens, Tennessee, take one more step. I want to tell you two more things, and then I'm going to leave you. The first is about Caleb Bowers. Caleb Bowers, the Lance Corporal from the goat track, the kid who cried for 90 seconds behind a HESCO wall in Sanjin. The kid who is now a 30-year-old lineman for the Tennessee Valley Authority in Athens, Tennessee, with a wife named Brittany and 2 children. The kid who sent Maya a Christmas card every December that began with the same sentence. Ghost is the reason this card exists. Caleb Bowers drove to Asheville on the 23rd of April, 2022, on a Saturday. He brought his wife and both of his children. He had asked Maya by text the week before whether he could come and see the grave. Maya had said yes. Caleb had asked whether he could bring his children. Maya had said yes. His older child, the boy, was 4 years old. His name was Ghost. I will say that again, because when I first learned it, I did not believe it. Caleb Bowers and his wife had named their first child, born in October of 2017, Ghost Bowers. The name was on the birth certificate. The middle name was Theodore, after Brittany's grandfather. The first name was Ghost. Caleb had never asked Maya's permission. He had not, in fact, told Maya about the name at all. The Christmas cards every year had been signed Caleb, Brittany, Ghost, and Hazel, and Maya had assumed for the first 2 years that there was a family dog. She had not asked. It had not seemed her business. When Caleb pulled into the driveway on the 23rd of April 2022 and got out of the truck and lifted his son down from the back seat, he said to Maya, who was standing on the porch, "Ma'am, this is my boy. This is Ghost." Maya looked at the child. She looked at Caleb. She did not say anything for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Hello, Ghost." The child said, "Hi." He was 4. He did not understand any of it. He understood that his father had brought him to a house in the mountains to meet a woman who, his father had told him in the truck on the way up, had once known the dog he was named after. He understood that there was going to be coffee for the grown-ups and apple juice for him. He understood that there was a porch with a swing on it. He walked up onto the porch. He sat on the swing next to Maya. He did not say anything else for a while. After about a minute, he said, "Did the dog have a tail?" Maya said yes. He had a tail. The child said, "Was it long or short?" Maya said it was long. It curled up over his back when he was happy. The child thought about it. He said, "Mine does not curl. My butt does not have a tail." Maya laughed. She laughed for the first time, I think, since the 11th of February. It was a small laugh. It was a laugh that came out of a place that had been closed for about 10 weeks. She laughed, and she put her hand on the top of the child's head, the way she had put her hand on the top of the dog's head, the way Frank had put his hand on the dog's head on the porch in October of 2019. They walked down to the flat rock together. Caleb, Brittany, the boy, the daughter, Hazel, who was 2 and who Brittany carried, Maya, Frank with his cane. Linda stayed on the porch because Linda had decided that this was not a moment for her. They stood on the flat rock above the river. The slate marker was there. 2 months of weather had not touched it. The carved line was still clean. Ghost. Work. Caleb stood looking at it for about a minute. He did not cry. He had done his crying in 19, and he had not, he told me later, done it again about this. He said, to no one in particular, he was a good dog. His son said, I am a good dog. Brittany said, you are a good boy, baby. The child said, same thing. Caleb laughed. Brittany laughed. Maya laughed. Frank, who had not laughed often in any year of his life that Maya could remember, laughed too. They stood on a flat rock above the French Broad River in April yellow light. 2 adults and a Marine's wife, and a 4-year-old who had been named for a dog he had never met, and a 2-year-old who would not remember any of it, and a 74-year-old retired SEAL leaning on a cane he did not need yet, but had started using anyway, and they laughed at the river for about 10 seconds. That is the second thing I wanted to tell you. The first thing was about the porch. The second thing was about the river. I have given you both. Now I am going to leave you with this. Harold Pierce signed 241 disposition memoranda in his 16 years as director of the Department of Defense Military Working Dog Program. The park investigation determined that at least 11 of those memoranda resulted in the death of dogs that should not have died, and that at least 23 more were procedurally improper in ways that may or may not have produced bad outcomes that we will never be able to reconstruct. Because dogs do not leave records the way people do, and a euthanized animal does not get a second opinion. Harold Pierce never went to a goat track in Sanjin. He never stood at a vehicle gate in Djibouti at 0400 in the morning watching a Hilux approach with 3 barrels of ammonium nitrate in the bed. He never crouched in a wadi in Anbar with a 48-kilogram Belgian Malinois leaning against his thigh, waiting for a hand signal that would either save his life or end it. He sat at a desk on the 2nd floor of Building 682 at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland, and he drank from a coffee mug that called him the world's okayest boss. And he signed pieces of paper that ended the lives of animals he had never met. And he believed, until the morning of October 9th, 2019, that he was a man whom nobody would seriously challenge. He was wrong about that. The person who was right about it brought a photograph. She brought a 4-month preparation timeline. She brought a sworn statement from a State Department officer's brother. She brought a single sentence her father had said to her on a back porch in June. And she carried that sentence for 4 months without telling anyone what she was going to do with it. And she walked it into a colonel's office at 1431 on the 9th of October and laid it on a desk next to a 4x6 print of a Marine with his arms around a dog. She did not raise her voice once that day. She did not raise her voice in the 4 months before. She has not raised her voice, as far as I can tell, in any part of this story. She is 36 years old now. She lives in Asheville. She left the Navy in 2021 after retiring as a chief petty officer with 17 years of service. She works for the Buncombe County Animal Shelter as their full-time training coordinator. Patrice Alcott offered her the job in March of 2021, and she accepted it in April. She makes $41,000 a year. She drives the same Subaru Outback. She lives in a small house on a slope down from her parents' house, on the same property, which Frank deeded over to her in 2020. She has a black and tan Belgian Malinois puppy named Doris, 18 months old, who she is training as a future shelter behavioral support dog. Doris is not Ghost. Doris does not need to be Ghost. That is the entire lesson of this story, if there's a lesson, which there may not be. Frank Thornton is 74. He is well. He is working on a new project in the workshop. He has not told anyone what it is. Linda Thornton is 72. Her garden is the best it has ever been. Daniel Coltrane is 60. He is still in the office above Smokey's Barbecue. He has taken on 4 more military working dog cases since Ghost. He has won all 4. He still charges $1. Daphne Crowder is 64. Mona is 12. Bartleby is 10. Howard Still fishes Canyon Lake on Tuesdays. Caleb Bowers is 30. His son Ghost is 4. His daughter Hazel is 2. They live in Athens, Tennessee. They're coming back to Asheville this October, the family told Maya in a text last week for a weekend. Walter Williams retired in April of 2020. He lives in Boerne, Texas, with his wife of 38 years. He has not spoken publicly about the phone call on the 9th of October 2019, and he is not going to. I did not ask him to. Harold Pierce is in Central Florida. He is 74. I do not know what his days look like, and I do not want to know. The slate marker on the flat rock above the French Broad River is still there. It will be there as long as the rock is there, which is going to be longer than any of us. Ghost. Work. I am Hatch. I served 30 years in the United States Marine Corps. I retired as a gunnery sergeant in 2007. I do this channel out of a small room in a house in coastal North Carolina, 4 hours east of Asheville and about 2 miles inland from a stretch of beach where I walk every morning at 05:30 with a dog I adopted from shelter in 2019, who is 14 years old now, and who does not have any military service in her background, and who is not particularly heroic, and who I love anyway. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. There is a button below this video. It is gray right now. Make it red. The next video I am working on is about a Coast Guard rescue swimmer named Brennan Yost and a fishing vessel called the Alaska Ranger in 2008, and a decision a man made in the water at 03:15 on a March morning in the Bering Sea that I have been trying to figure out how to tell properly for about 6 years, and I think I have finally figured it out. If you know somebody who handled a working dog, send them this video. They will know what to do with it. And if you're still here at the end, thank you. You watched the whole thing. That means something. I will see you next time, out here